In 1956, a truck driver from North Carolina sat in a line of trucks at a New Jersey pier and got very annoyed. He watched men carry cargo onto a ship, one sack at a time. He had been waiting most of the day. His name was Malcom McLean. His bad mood would eventually erase, by some counts, 1,000,000 jobs. It would also make almost everything you own cheap enough to buy. This is the story of the most boring object that ever changed the world. No engine, no electronics, no moving parts. A steel box with a door on one end. There are millions of them on Earth right now, and you have probably never looked at one properly. Roughly 90% of everything traded on this planet spends part of its life inside one. It is the most successful machine of the 20th century, and it is not really a machine at all. To understand what the box destroyed, you first have to see what the docks were before it. The 1950s. Loading a cargo ship looked like this: thousands of loose barrels, bags, crates and drums. The trade had a name for it: break bulk. Every item handled separately, by hand, by men. Gangs of dock workers carried each piece down into the hold and stacked it like a puzzle with no picture. Heavy things on the bottom, fragile things wedged where they would not shift when the sea got rough. It was a craft. A good gang boss could read a ship's hold the way a carpenter reads timber. It was also brutal. Men were crushed, dropped, and buried under cargo with grim regularity. One ship could take a whole week to load, sometimes longer, which meant a ship, the most expensive thing a shipping company owned, spent half its life tied to a pier, earning nothing. Ships only make money moving. In port, a ship is just a very large bill. Add it all up, and the numbers were absurd. Half the cost of shipping anything was simply the loading and unloading. Cargo also kept vanishing. The docks had a saying: your wage plus whatever you could carry home. Whiskey, watches, cigarettes. Insurers priced dock theft in the way they price bad weather. Hiring was worse. In many ports, men gathered every morning, and a boss pointed at the ones who would eat that week. They called it the shape-up. Show up, get picked, or go home with nothing. It was a hard, proud, dangerous world, and it had worked more or less the same way for 5,000 years. Malcom McLean was not a sailor. He had never worked a dock in his life. He had started with one second-hand truck and built it into one of the largest trucking companies in America, which is exactly why he could see it. He did not love ships. He had no tradition to protect. His idea was insultingly simple: stop touching the cargo, put everything inside one big metal box. Trucks carry the box, cranes lift the box, ships stack the box, and nobody ever opens the box. The cargo gets handled twice, once when it is packed, once when it arrives, not 40 times in between. The shipping industry laughed at him. Real ships had carried loose cargo in nets since the Phoenicians. Whole ports were built around the old way: warehouses, rail spurs, and thousands of men. So McLean did something that should have destroyed him. He sold his trucking company. The regulators would not let one man own the trucks and the ships. He chose the ships and walked away from the business he had built. Then he borrowed heavily, took over an ailing steamship line, and started cutting holes in war surplus tankers. On April 26, 1956, a converted tanker called the Ideal X sailed from Newark, New Jersey. On her deck sat 58 metal boxes bound for Houston. Loading her had taken under 8 hours. Not a week. 8 hours. The math was violence. Loading loose cargo cost about $5.83 a ton. Loading the box cost 16 cents. That is not an improvement. That is a different universe. A Union man watched the Ideal X sail away and said what everyone on that pier was thinking. They ought to sink that son of a gun. He was not being dramatic. He was being accurate. Every man on that dock understood the arithmetic immediately. The box did not need their hands. What followed was a 20-year fight, port by port, contract by contract. The dockworkers' unions were strong, and they did not simply hand over the waterfront. In some ports they struck. In others they argued over rules about who was allowed to pack a box and where. On the American West Coast, the union eventually signed a deal that has been argued about ever since. Accept the machines. In exchange, guaranteed pay and money for the men who would be replaced. It was, in effect, a payment for the funeral of their own trade. Many took it. There was not much choice. Meanwhile, the box had a second enemy, and this one was less obvious. It was itself. Every company built its own boxes. Different lengths, different corners, different lifting fittings. A crane in one port could not reliably lift a rival's box. The whole idea only worked if everyone used the same box. So through the 1960s, engineers and committees argued the world into a standard. 20 feet and 40 feet long, 8 feet wide. Corner castings identical everywhere on Earth. It is the least glamorous achievement in this story, and possibly the most important one. McLean then did something a monopolist would never do. His company released its patents so that anyone could build the box. He understood that a standard only makes a fortune if everybody adopts it. A box nobody else can lift is worth nothing. The 20-foot container even became a unit of measurement. World trade is now counted in TEU, 20-foot equivalent units. The world quietly agreed to measure its own economy in Malcom McLean's boxes. Then the Vietnam War arrived and ended the argument completely. The American military could not supply that build-up by hand. It hired McLean's containers instead. The ships went out full of military cargo, then stopped in Japan on the way home and came back, loaded with electronics. Port by port, the old waterfront began to die, and it died faster than anyone had expected. New York's famous finger piers went quiet. They were built for men and warehouses, not for cranes and acres of asphalt. The ships moved across the river to Elizabeth, New Jersey, where there was room to stack boxes. A whole neighborhood economy went with them. The bars, the boarding houses, the hiring halls. Longshore gangs of 20 men became crane crews of 2. In New York, the number of registered dock workers fell by roughly 2/3 within about 15 years. London's docks, the reason London existed as a port at all, closed almost entirely. The work moved downriver. And then something strange happened to the empty ground the box had left behind. London's dead docklands were rebuilt into Canary Wharf, a district of glass towers full of bankers. The men who moved the world's goods were replaced by men who moved the world's money, standing on the same mud. Across the world, within one generation, hundreds of thousands of dock jobs simply evaporated. The men were not lazy, or unskilled, or badly managed. Their skill had been made unnecessary by a shape. That is worth sitting with, because it is the most modern part of this story. Nothing was invented that could do their job better. The job was redefined until it no longer existed. The cargo hook, the tool a longshoreman carried his whole working life, went home for good. But the box was not finished. It did not just move cargo. It moved the entire world economy. Shipping got so cheap that it stopped being a factor. Moving a sweater across an ocean now costs a few cents. And when distance stops costing money, distance stops mattering. Factories no longer had to sit near their customers. They could sit anywhere on the planet with a port. Your phone, your shoes, the chair you are sitting on. Almost everything you own rode to you inside McLean's boring box. Economists argue the container did more for world trade than every free trade agreement ever signed. The ships grew to match. The Ideal X carried 58 boxes. The largest ships today carry more than 20,000. They are longer than the Empire State Building is tall, and they are run by a crew of about 24 people. That is the bargain the box made, over and over. Fewer hands, more cargo, every single year. There is a cost hidden inside that efficiency. Nobody really knows what is in most of the boxes. Customs services inspect only a small fraction of them. The rest move on paperwork and trust. And when one link jams, the whole planet notices. In 2021, a single ship wedged sideways in the Suez Canal and stalled world trade for 6 days. McLean himself did not end well. In 1986, his shipping empire collapsed in one of the largest bankruptcies in American history. He had bet everything on cheap fuel, and the oil market did not cooperate. The man who reshaped trade was beaten by it. Malcom McLean died in 2001. That morning, container ships around the world blew their horns for him. Not bad for a truck driver who hated waiting in line. The box won. It always wins.